Hello and welcome to MedCity News' Invest Digital Health Conference. I am Arundhati Parmar. I'm the editor-in-chief of MedCity News. Digital twin technology is coming into healthcare consciousness as the world of life sciences looks to leverage digital technologies in everything from drug development and clinical trials to patient engagement and medication adherence. So today, I'm very pleased to introduce the assembled panel. We have Andy Greenberg, Managing Director of Accenture, who will be our moderator. Sandrine Dessoy, Digital Innovation Lead with GSK. Charles Fischer, Founder and CEO of Unlearn.AI. Stephen Levine, Senior Director of Virtual Human Modeling at Dessoy Systèmes. Alberto Pascual, Director of Data Science and Analytics at IDBS. Andy is a managing director leading Accenture's North America digital health work within the life sciences practice. Andy has a unique ability to translate market vision into an executable strategy and to motivate individuals and organizations to deliver on that strategy. With more than 20 years of experience developing and leading high-performance teams and launching technology-based products in the life sciences, healthcare, and wellness spaces, Andy has a deep understanding of how to utilize data and analytics to translate user behavior into an actionable roadmap. Welcome, Andy. Sandrine Dessoy. After 2 years of academic research, Sandrine started her career in biotechnology at Solvay Enzymes, where she was in charge of scale-up and tech transfer for enzyme productions. She joined the R&D department of SmithKline Beecham, currently GSK Vaccines, and worked in development and scale-up of drug substance processes, process modeling, and evaluation of new technologies. In recent years, she fostered innovation in technical R&D, initiated and now leads digital twin projects. Sandrine holds a chemical engineering degree and a master in molecular biology and biotechnology from the Université Libre de Brussels. Charles Fischer, founder and CEO of Unlearn.AI. Charles is a scientist with interests at the intersection of physics, machine learning, and computational biology. Previously, Charles worked as a machine learning engineer at Leap Motion and a computational biologist at Pfizer. He was a Philippe Meyer Fellow in Theoretical Physics at École Normale Supérieure in Paris, France, and a postdoctoral scientist in biophysics at Boston University. Charles holds a Ph.D. in biophysics from Harvard University and a BS in biophysics from the University of Michigan. Welcome, Charles. Stephen Levine is the Senior Director of Virtual Human Modeling at Dassault Systèmes. He began his career in health tech at the San Diego-based startup Biosim that went public as Accelleris in 2004 and was acquired by Dassault Systèmes in 2014. He has more than 30 years of experience in the development of computational tools that translate cutting-edge science into product innovations. Stephen currently leads virtual human modeling at Dassault Systèmes and is a founder and executive director of the Living Heart Project. He is responsible for a life science incubator of startup healthcare companies within the 3D Experience Labs, building a marketplace of digital healthcare services, and serves on several company boards. Stephen was elected into the College of Fellows in the American Institute of Medical and Biological Engineering and holds a PhD in Materials Science from Rutgers University. Welcome, Stephen. Alberto Pascual. He is the Director of Data Science and Analytics and has a long experience in data science and biomedical domains. Graduated in computer science, he received a PhD in bioinformatics from the Autonomous University of Madrid. After some postdoc period, he joined the National Center for Biotechnology, leading a bioinformatics research and core facility group. He also co-founded Integromics, a bioinformatics startup, in 2003. The company received the Frost & Sullivan European Bioinformatics Project of the Year Award for 2007. The company was acquired by Perkin Elmer in 2014 when he served as a senior manager of AI and analytics innovation. Currently, he is the Director of Data Science and Analytics at IDBS, where he is responsible for developing and executing IDBS's strategy on AI, data science, and analytics to deliver novel products and services to customers in life sciences R&D markets. Welcome to you, Alberto. And with that, I will hand it over to the moderator, Andy.
Thank you, MedCity News. It's really great to be here today, and I'd like to welcome everyone to this panel on the role of digital twins in life sciences. My name is Andy Greenberg. I'm a managing director at Accenture, where I lead our digital health practice for life sciences. And as said, I'm really excited to moderate this panel today, and you'll get to meet our both interesting and esteemed panelists here in a moment. In this space in digital twin, it's a really interesting time. We've recently completed research of about 100 plus executive leaders at life sciences company. And it's an interesting time because we have about 1 in 5 are deploying digital twin in some way at scale, with another 25% or so doing some real experimentation. But it's right at the time now where there's a look for the opportunity. And what you'll see across the panel today is we have everything from manufacturing to human organs to full human views of digital twin, and it really spans the spectrum. But before we jump into the intros, just one last quick note. When we talk about digital twins, you actually can go all the way back to April of 1970 for the first example. For those of you who are old enough to remember Apollo 13 or who have seen the movie, a great film with Tom Hanks and Kevin Bacon, you'll know that up in space, we actually had the Apollo 13 had a catastrophic failure. Astronauts were in great risk. It turned out that NASA had put together 15 different simulations of the spacecraft pieces that they were able to assemble together and test what would happen in these different scenarios to see how they could get them back. And ultimately, the happy ending to the story is by doing that testing remotely here on Earth with a first digital twin, they were quite successful in getting the astronauts back safely. Now, as I've been talking to the panelists, the really fascinating part about digital twins now is that it spans much more broadly than just an individual piece of equipment, an individual spacecraft. And when it's at its most powerful, it allows us to ask what if questions in ways that we could never imagine before. So with that, I'd like to introduce you to the panel, and then we'll jump into some questions for today. So if we can start out, Sandrine Dessoy, Digital Innovation Lead from GSK, please.
Yes, so nice to meet everybody. My name is Sandrine Dessoy. I'm working in GSK Vaccine in the technical R&D department. So that's the department where we develop the vaccine manufacturing process, and also we develop the analytical test to release the vaccine. I am always been passionate by life science, and I started by developing enzyme and then vaccine process, and quite rapidly I moved to modeling and innovation. And at a conference, I heard about digital twin for the preventive maintenance for mechanical equipment. And at that time, I said, wow, that's really wonderful. We should do it for the vaccine. And I had the chance to be able to launch that project in GSK. And so at the moment, we are developing digital twin for vaccine processes.
Terrific. Thank you. And Charles, over to you.
Thanks. I'm Charles Fischer, the CEO at UnlearnAI. And we develop digital twins of individual people who are enrolled in clinical trials that allow us to ask what would happen to this person if they were to be randomized to receive some existing comparator treatment. And then we can leverage the predictions from those digital twins to help run much faster clinical trials in which fewer patients have to be randomized to receive placebo. So we get much more patient-centric, faster clinical trials that still allow us to get rigorous evidence about the safety and efficacy of new treatments.
Yeah, that's fascinating stuff. And Stephen, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. My name's Steve Levine. I lead development of virtual human twins at Dassault Systèmes. So how did I get to that position? Well, my PhD is in material science, which is a little bit unique in that it means that I was trained to understand that the behavior of an object is really based a result directly of how it's put together, regardless of whether it's a machine or a biological organism. So I first used those computational tools to explore atomic level behavior of structures like silicon chips and fiber optic cables to try to get them across the ocean in the pre-internet days. And of course, focused on things like rational drug design, which are commonly used today in places like GSK, et cetera. Well, as computer power grew, I turned my focus to large-scale engineering. We heard the digital twin analog of the aircraft. So I focused at Dassault Systèmes when I joined them on large-scale engineering, entire automobiles and commercial jets, et cetera. And of course, the virtual twin technology now is very commonplace. So now back in 2013, I wondered, could we apply those same principles to the human body? And so I launched the Living Heart Project as an attempt to see if we could bring together all of the cardiovascular knowledge that existed across the world. Did we know enough as a community, as a large-scale community, to actually build an entire human heart? In that project, I got people to work together on a common representation of the heart rather than fragmented in their own laboratories. And it turned out, it took us a couple of years, but it turned out we actually did know enough to build an entire human heart. And that was kind of a turning point in the field, at least in the discipline, the domain that I'm in, because it changed it from, could we do this, to when can we do this? And that's where we are today.
Terrific, and excited to hear more about that as we go through the day. And last but not least, Alberto, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Alberto Pascual. I'm Director of Data Science and Analytics at IDBS. IDBS is a company that is part of the Danaher Group, and we create digital solutions for biopharma and other industry. So I started as a computer scientist many years ago. I have been involved in this area for many years. I was exposed to digital twins in a different way. I think we didn't name it that way, digital twin, but we were creating simulations, always in many fields. I have been involved in clinical, in translational, in genomics, and we were doing twins without even knowing that we were doing twins. Now, in the space that I'm involved in the biopharma space, and well, this is even more important because we try to help scientists in understanding, in reducing the time to market, reducing the cost in putting a drug in the market. And for that, we need to decrease the cost, and we need to understand the processes, and digital twins are an excellent tool for that. But I would like to perhaps focus more today on one of the components of the twins. How do we organize the data, the metadata, the models, in order to facilitate the twins and the modeling? So very happy to be here.
Terrific. Thank you, Alberto. And maybe that's just to kick it off a little bit, and maybe Sandrine, we'll start back with you. You talked about the excitement over the seeing the turbines and the ability there, and now here we're talking about setting up twins for living things to some extent, and to manufacture of that. Can you talk a little bit about the differences from what you saw within sort of what would be traditional, let me see, maintenance on a piece of equipment, to what has to change to think about something like vaccine manufacturing?
Yeah, so if I go back to the example you take about the Apollo flight, you had a great simulator that helped the people to understand what was the best action to take in order to avoid to go back to Earth. What we want to do with the vaccine is to do the same, but use that in real time. So traditionally, the vaccine are not is not an industry that is well automatized. And what we want to do, we really want to introduce with the digital twin automation and digitalization really at the heart of our process. So we do, as Apollo, we have a simulator to be able to represent what's happening either in the living bacteria, like we are when we model a cell culture, for example, or for the purification step after. So we have models that reproduce what can happen inside a bacteria or reactor or a purification equipment. But we linked those models in real time with the process. So we have the real process, we get data from the real process, and those data are sent into the simulator, the digital twin, that understand what's happening. So, for example, it will tell you that is the quality of the vaccine I'm producing at the moment, and this quality is well aligned with our specification. Or it will say, oh no, now there is a slight deviation. The quality is not the optimum, and so it will use that. And again, the simulation to see, as Apollo did manually, he used the simulation to detect what is the best combination of the process parameter in order to go back to do the best process and producing the best quality. So for us, it's changed quite a lot because the process is then completely automated with an advanced process control. The great advantage is that the operator that is still in the plant can understand in real time what is happening. And life process, for example, cell culture, are very complex processes. So it's not always easy, even if you have the best expert and the best scientist, to understand at the time it's produced what's really happening in the bioreactor. And the twin will really help for that and provide really understanding of the process and insight on what to do.
Terrific. That's really really fascinating and helpful. And Alberto, I know we talked a bit about it before, but maybe can you then add on? I know you have some views on how this then really feeds value back into the business, and then also, as you were describing earlier, the setup of the modeling to make sure that yes, we're ensuring that we have a better outcome from the quality of the vaccine and the yield, but really how that fits back into the business model, because ultimately, I think if we're going to get from one in five to this being at scale, a big part is going to be making sure we can really justify the value to the business. So if you could share a bit about that, that'd be terrific.
I think Sandrine made a great introduction of the problem and how it's used in practice in a company like GSK Vaccines. And I have to say, maybe just very big numbers, but creating new drugs, especially in biologics, is 10 years and 1 billion, up to 1 billion. So it's a huge problem. What happened with COVID and the vaccine, this is actually a miracle, doing that in such a short time. So there is an urgent need, I think, to improve the efficiency, in time and reduce the cost. That's save life and also makes our life more affordable in a way, right? So in order to do that, I think the twins and the digitalization in the companies is extremely important. What Sandrine mentioned in terms of optimizing the different units of operations in the full process is essential. And this starts with data. You have to combine historical data. Obviously, this is what you use for creating the models. Also process information, material information, and then collect all the real-time information from instruments like the bioreactors. By the way, for those that are not familiar to bioreactors, those are vessels, those are instruments that help the cells do their job, grow and replicate and produce for us the product, the biological product that is used for vaccines and other drugs. So the way the cells operate, it has to be on the very, very specific control parameters, and you have to keep that in track, and you have to determine what are the most important if they are getting off limits, and also combine that with all the different other sources of information. So you can imagine that you immediately get into a big data problem, but it's not only that. How do you align all these data sources? Process data, real-time data, different scales, instrument data. So technologies like IoT instruments connecting to each other and producing this huge amount of data have to be collected and managed in a way. So this is, for example, what we do in order to facilitate the twins creation, just to collect the information from the different processes, different steps, and different procedures, and then put them in the same context, add some metadata, some information that help us do the analytics. And then, only then we are ready to create models and create twins. So let's say that in a way, what we are trying to do in my company is to be one step before what, for example, what GSK is doing on the vaccine part, just prepare all the information before getting into the twin. So that's perhaps one point I wanted to make here.
Yeah, that's terrific, and as you say, truly miraculous what was able to happen with vaccines over the last couple of years. So that's fascinating, and maybe shifting gears a little bit. You were making the point about data and where really, to some extent there's all the control of all of the data within the bioreactor and otherwise, which is its own set of challenges. But Steve, maybe moving over to you, I think as you were describing the human heart, and clearly for the digital twins, right, having good data is at the core of being able to get to a good answer. You had a bit of a different challenge of having to grab data from lots of other places. Would love to hear you tell a little bit of how do you navigate that with regulatory and otherwise to get at that, and how did you navigate and again in the end wind up with a good model of the human heart?
Yeah, well, thanks, Sandy. I think anyone who's thought at all about digital health recognizes that really data is the engine. It's the feed that drives the whole machine. And of course, at Dassault Systèmes, our history comes from other industries that have gone through digital transformations, in the past when at the time when that industry was ready to go through it. And so we have some experience in understanding how to manage that complexity of data and the importance of bringing together all of these disparate sources into kind of what we call the single source of truth, which in this case, I use the human body or the human heart as the common reference point for all the data points. And so the first thing that's important is that you have to create this context by which you can interpret the data. And that helps manage the complexity of all the data, and in these 3D representations, in these virtual twins, what they provide to you is that common reference because they all connect back in some way. Of course, practically, you have to be able to manage that data, provide security. Data privacy is absolutely essential, specific to the project and the way that we went about assembling the data and protecting all of the privacy and intellectual property in building the human heart. We really managed it by creating a unique relationship with every contributor. So even though in our project, we were able to bring together what is now more than 150 different organizations working together on a common representation. If you think about a company, I don't know, like Boeing has 1,000 different companies working on a single jet. And of course, each of those companies has their own unique data that they need protected. And so that model exists within our digital platform to protect all that individual knowledge and data, but to bring it together at the level where you can share it and create a successful product. And so we've been able to take these concepts of digital continuity that have developed in other industries and adapt them into life sciences, which hopefully by representing the patient, which is what we're here to talk about, we can create that digital continuity from the early discovery that happens in the laboratory to the practice in the clinic. And by including the virtual body, the virtual patient in there, hopefully we can create that kind of continuity.
Terrific. And maybe before we jump over to Charles, where I want to delve a little deeper, are you seeing now some examples of where you've been able to model the heart, where companies have taken that to either accelerate creation of a new physical product or a drug or otherwise, where it's actually been put to use from bringing something to market faster, or is it still too early to be seeing it used in that way?
Well, great question. So there's two pieces of it, of that question. Certainly the heart is now in practice in R&D in labs around the world. And so there's a lot of advances that are happening, faster than they would otherwise, because we can replace animal testing, the majority of animal testing in certain domains. Once you've validated the model for a particular application, you can do it thousands of times very quickly. And so it's found its fastest route to market in medical devices, which have a shorter time frame. We've been able to get that down dramatically. And so now devices that have been validated in the heart are now going through the regulatory process. On the other end of the spectrum, jumping to actual clinical practice, the heart model can be made to represent either population specific, which you would do if you're developing a new drug or device, or patient specific, which is what you would do if you're using it in the clinic. And in patient specific mode, it's already being used, for example, in challenging pediatric cases where the surgeons, the doctors are seeing unique situations, and they can practice the surgery beforehand 5-10 times, predict the outcome the same way the Apollo scientists did. We can do that quickly in the virtual world and then perform those surgeries. And that's happening, and already lives have been saved. Really exciting to see that.
Terrific. And then Charles, shifting gears over at the intersection of lots of data and outcomes. I know when we were chatting before that even with the enormous computational power that exists today in the volumes of data, when you start to look at the whole human, you're still getting into a range where you have to think about this whole twin model differently and how it delivers outcomes. Can you share a bit about how the approach that you've been forced to take is a little bit of a different cut on this because of the raw volume of variables that are involved?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my background, originally I was a theoretical physicist working on protein folding. And there's a really great example of this exact problem, right? So protein folding is very complex. You have, interactions between all of the different atoms in this protein. And we tried for years to use physical laws to build up for piece by piece, bottom up, how we think proteins fold and interact with each other. And our progress was sort of okay. We ended up with things that were okay. And then a few months ago, a DeepMind, an artificial intelligence company from Google, they applied a new AI-based approach. And starting from the problem, instead of starting with 30 years of this bottom-up approach, they took a top-down, data-driven approach from AI, and they made an immense leap to where some people say that the problem is solved, but the gap between where those physical approaches and the AI-based approaches is enormous. And we think about bringing that same type of idea into this place of building digital twins for complex systems like a whole human. I think that a lot of the times, where we have seen digital twins be very useful are areas where we have blueprints. We understand what the components are. We can then build models for those components, but we don't have a blueprint for the whole human body. And especially when you get into the drug space where you're thinking about, genes and proteins and how they interact. That's a crazy complex system. Right? We don't understand how those pieces work. So rather than trying to start from that bottom-up approach, take all those different pieces, we take a top-down approach where we collect lots of longitudinal patient data, and then we use methods from deep learning to be able to train models that are then able to perform the kinds of simulations that we want. And so it's different because we're not really focused on the inner workings of the model, but we're entirely focused on its ability to answer the questions about patients that we want to answer. And I think earlier we heard a lot about data and the data that goes into these models. It's even more important, I would say, for these AI-based approaches to really think hard about the data that are going in, because in the end, that's the information that you're going to have that's coming out.
Terrific. And I'll sort of open this up to the whole group, and it's maybe the intersection of a couple of questions that have come to mind as you've all been talking. Is one is very much just the regulatory agencies. How do you look at how the regulatory agencies have historically reacted to some of this, to where they are now, to where you'd like them to get to? And maybe, Charles, to your last point, also, how do we make sure that we're designing systems that, if it is outside of our range of knowledge or what AI's experience is, that we don't wind up, and I'll look at the social side, introducing unintended bias, or in this case, unintended risk in what we do as a result. Be curious to, and anyone who wants to go first, I'd be curious to hear your takes on within your particular areas, those two flavors of of AI, both regulatory and actually managing when it's something new that maybe we don't have confidence that the AI model fully understands?
Well, I can share my experience working with the FDA. It's a little bit different. I was very fortunate when we launched the Living Heart project back in 2014. The FDA actually joined the project from the start so that they could understand the technology, and they were great contributors in helping us develop it in a way that they believed they could actually leverage it from a regulatory perspective. And so they've been guiding us. And in fact, now the Living Heart is being used in a project that I'm principal investigator with the FDA to build virtual patients. In this case, we're testing a heart valve repair treatment to lower the cost and barrier. So I have pretty good understanding of what they need to understand and in the model and the validation. I think the FDA is being very open-minded about these models, but their challenge, particularly with artificial intelligence, is they're often black boxes. It's very difficult for a regulator to really understand the training set, how you can validate it, what the domain of applicability it is, until you've already collected the data, enough data to validate the model, and you have this chicken and the egg problem. And so the domain that we've been focusing on is, of course, these hybrid models where you potentially can use the virtual twins to train the AI, in which case the source of data because it's very clean. You've generated it in virtual twins, and then you can test it. And so that's starting to build up confidence if you can create that, take away a little bit of that mystery. And then, of course, in the end, you always have to validate it. But I think they're really looking for ways for you just to be able to unpack and understand the applicability of the technique. And again, I think these kinds of virtual twins really offer that opportunity.
And Sandrine and Alberto, realizing that ultimately there's testing at the end to make sure of quality and so forth. Have you had any in terms of GXP or otherwise in the process of introducing twins as the way you're looking at manufacturing? Has there been any additional overhead or other elements you've had to take on as you've introduced some of the digital twin processes, or maybe as you've moved from factory to factory?
Yes, in our case, so we moved the digital twin to a GMP operation. So we validated it, and that was a big step, I think. And what is good is that the regulators recommend to move from testing the product when it's produced to more test and understanding of the process during the process itself. And so with the digital twin, we introduced new sensor, we introduced new advanced technology. So we have a better monitoring all along the production. We have also advanced control that's able to detect and anticipate even any deviation. So we think that's really going into the right direction, and regulators are very open to those new technologies. Maybe one additional concern that we have is that, of course, for the advanced control, you need models. And as Alberto said, usually you use machine learning models, so using the data. In our case, we don't rely only on machine models because when we start a development, we have few data, so not enough data to build machine learning models. So we need to start, we start with mechanistic model, and when we have more and more data, we improve our model and go for hybrid models. So there is a component of AI into a process control. And that's something we have to discuss with the authority. So the way we want to do it is not to have a regular and continuous update of the model, because in the pharma, it's important to be able to link what you did at the time with your variable. So for example, if the controller took an action, we have to say, okay, this action was taken because it was calculated by this model at that moment. So what we intend to do is to accumulate the data for a few runs, maybe during 6 months of manufacturing, and then have an update of the model and then go through a validation. And then the problems is not how to bring AI into process control, but how to validate a model for process control. And that's probably something that is more, that we have more knowledge to do it.
Terrific. And Alberto, as you talk about kind of the front end of the process that you're working on, maybe can you share a bit as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a similar experience. We are a software vendor, so maybe in that sense we are in a more comfortable position in a way, because we help our customers in the validation process. But you know, data integrity is usually the main concern, and that's why we have developed this biopharma lifecycle management platform just to eliminate this repetitive manual task, allowing the collection or the execution of the process and collecting the data in a way that we can easily validate it, at least the integrity part. But I agree with Sandrine that when we come to the machine learning AI, I think there's still some work to do there in terms of validation. We have seen a lot of maybe techniques that are very basic in a way, just because of the validation issues, and so you need to control the randomness of the process so you can really try to replicate. So the FDA is, I think, is working very hard also to try to facilitate the task, you know, incorporate AI in a more natural way, but it still is a long way to go. We usually try to think that starting with right data and guaranteeing integrity is the first step, obviously, to guarantee we can continue from that point on and facilitate the validation, but there's still a way to go there. Yeah.
Terrific. And then Charles, if you were describing kind of the bottoms up to the deep mind and the gap between that, you know, where you know, I think we've heard the black box term. How have you found navigating the sort of the realities of what, you know, what the regulatory agencies are willing to look at today? And I know you mentioned this a little bit, and maybe even as, or more importantly, just making sure that your model, what the output is safe, for lack of a better term, with what it's suggesting.
So yeah, I mean, our work with the regulators has been going really well. We're in active qualification procedures at both FDA and EMA, and anticipate some, you know, positive movement, especially in Europe, very soon. So, you know, what we're and the key aspect actually of that for us is not focusing on the digital twin itself, but focusing on how it's used. Because you really can't separate the accuracy of your twin from the question you're trying to answer. Depends. It's going to be better for some questions, worse for other questions, right? This famous statistician quote from George Box that all models are wrong, but some are useful. And I think that whether you're building something from bottom up or a statistical model or a machine learning model, it's important to keep that in mind. So what we've done is, in addition to trying to build the best digital twins that we can, is we've developed clinical trial designs, so statistical methods, where we can incorporate these digital twins into the analyses of the trial in a way that we mathematically guarantee that the resulting trial has the desired statistical properties. In particular, you don't get the wrong answer. So even if there are areas in which the model we are using is wrong, the trial will still be correct. And you know, we've spent a lot of time, you know, combing through statistical guidance and things like this from FDA and EMA and ICH. And so by developing methods that allow you to use imperfect models in the real world, I think actually beyond, you know, what we're thinking about for just clinical trials, where it's obviously very, very important, but that's true for all things, right? Really need to think about not just developing the best models we can, but developing applications of those models that are going to be insensitive to where those models are wrong.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And has it, you know, again, pretty different approach to what they're used to, and you know, certainly what we're seeing across all of the clients we work with is engaging the agencies earlier as having be part of the discussion, as opposed to delivering just an answer at the end. Seems to be an important step that of bringing them along, and we certainly are seeing a lot of willingness. it's also been interesting, I think, that we've seen that in some cases now it feels like there's more internal resistance at some of the organizations based on how they've historically done things than what's actually true at the regulatory agency. So it almost is, there's some internal inertia that we're seeing the need to overcome at some of the organizations. But maybe to shift from the looking backwards and looking at what you're all doing today. You all have such fascinating perspectives as you look at your AI powered crystal ball, and this can be either in your space or not. Would love to hear each of you, and maybe we'll close on this. Each of you share where you think the biggest opportunities for digital twin are within life sciences in the coming, let's call it, let's not go out 10 years, but let's say 3 or 4 years, where you're going to see some real additional disruption that's going to deliver real either fundamental different outcomes or speed or efficiencies or otherwise. Would love to hear each of you give your views on that. Maybe we'll start with you, Steve.
Sure, thanks, Mel. Pretty challenging question, and certainly the time frame makes a big difference. As you pointed out, healthcare is a field that moves pretty slowly. For good reason. We have to be careful with all the change. We get very good about being careful about the way we practice medicine, the way the regulators work, the way the pharma companies produce products and validate their products. What will change quickly are the consumers, patients' behavior. And I think there's a lot of, we haven't really talked about it a little bit today, but of course, anyways, I focus on representing the patient. I think the concept of patient centricity, and one of the things that we've all heard that this recent pandemic has changed, is the role of the patient in the process, the relationship between the patient and their care, their ability to self-diagnose and communicate, home care, really beginning the process of changing from to patient-centric, really from disease-centric to patient-centric. And I think, at least from the domain that I focus in, helping to demystify what is happening inside the body will make the patient more involved in the choice of care, reporting of data, the quality of data, and as the data quality gets better, the models we all build will get better, and then the treatments will get more specific. And so I feel we're going to break down that barrier between the industry and the patient, the consumer, and that will really accelerate the quality of how we all work.
Yeah, it really is a virtuous cycle there that gets created. That's I think that's exciting. Sandrine, over to you. What's your view on the horizon?
Yeah, so I'm sticking to the vaccine industry, and we saw with the pandemic that it's very important to get to deliver a vaccine quickly to the whole world and big quantity of vaccine. I'm convinced that with a digital twin, we can accelerate this delivery of vaccine. As Alberto said, we can use a digital twin from drug design or for vaccine design. Charles mentioned the digital twin to understand the protein folding. So all those components are very important to select the best antigen you want to use for the vaccine. And that will be accelerated with the digital twin. Then all the process development will also be accelerated because you can do that on your computer. If you have to run a cell culture experiment, it can take 3 weeks. In a computer, it will take you a few minutes. So you will drastically reduce also the time to develop the process. And that's what we saw, I think, with some of the company today. And at the end, when you have produced a vaccine now, it usually takes you about 3 months to release the vaccine. And we are convinced that the digital twin is really the best technology to support the real-time release. So having this very close monitoring and tight advanced process control, we think that once the vaccine will leave the production line, it will be released. And so you can, again, go quicker to the supply chain.
Terrific. And Alberto, again, as you think about the front-end processes or elsewhere, where do you see things going?
Well, maybe what what I also think, what I would like to have, I would like to see, maybe that's what I would like to share today.
I like that.
Perhaps instead of digital twin, thinking more on digital labs, for example, full plants. Right? In the case of manufacturing, I mean, it can be a reality. We are too focused today on maybe independent units or a specific instrument, or that we want to replicate with a twin. But I think we have the proper technology already to get that at a higher level. So I can foresee, in a few years from now, a full factory or a manufacturing plant, fully automated with multiple twins, and then you can simulate the full lab. That I think can be a reality. And if I look back a little bit about the car industry, or we have been talking about airplane industry, but in the car industry, my own car has a lot of automatic features, and and they have been approved, right? My car brakes by itself, or prevent me from moving to another lane without the proper signaling. So I mean that can be a reality, in a few years from now in a big plant. So all these instruments talking to each other, sharing information, and not working in silos. So that's what I see, the industry is going maybe in a few years from now.
Yeah, I think that's terrific. And in fact, when you talk about that what if question that we referred to earlier, the bigger and bigger you think about that system, the more interesting the what if questions can become, and frankly, the more value you can unlock. So I think that's a really an interesting perspective, and agree that we've seen some work with where that it started out within a plant, and then from the plant looking at the entire manufacturing and supply chain, and you realize that as you ask those questions more broadly, there's a lot of additional opportunities to get life-saving therapies more quickly and less expensively, and so forth, but really to be able to ask much harder what if questions. And maybe with that, Charles, I'm very interested to hear your take as well.
Well, I think broadly, digital twins are being used in so many things that I think they'll have a lot of impact. I think within our domain, we can help people run clinical trials that have the same degree of rigor and evidence, but require 25% or so fewer patients. And that's a dramatic reduction in the timeline and cost of those clinical trials. And also by taking a sort of this top-down AI-driven approach, it's something that we can start applying really across different disease areas relatively quickly. So, we're actively doing this now for phase 2 and phase 3 clinical trials in Alzheimer's disease. But we're starting to explore the ability to apply that to different areas. So I think over the next few years, we're going to see, I think, dramatic improvements in clinical development, both, I think, in animal modeling, which we actually don't do. But if you think about toxicology style studies, I think there's going to be big applications there from other companies. And then in the clinic for speeding up and creating much smaller but still rigorous and fast clinical trials, that will have a dramatic improvement to just the pace of medical research overall. And so I think it's going to see a big impact in the pace of drug development over the next, say 5 years.
Terrific. And I know I said that might be our last question, but I think we have a few more minutes. So I actually want to ask the flip side of that question as well to you all, and then we'll wrap up, which is, what do you think the biggest obstacles to achieving your vision of a few years out is, and maybe what do you think we might need to do to overcome it? And we'll go back in reverse order. Charles, back to you, and then we'll move back through.
For us, the biggest obstacle is making sure that we have the raw materials that we need in these different disease areas. And that's high quality longitudinal patient data. I mean, when we're thinking about data in healthcare, if you look at the machine learning applications, we have small data, small data sets, a lot of missing data, a lot of quality control issues in the data. It's very different from a lot of other areas of application. So I think the biggest obstacle is going to be making sure that we have enough high quality data in these different domains to be able to do it.
Terrific. Alberto?
I think I concur. I mean, I don't see any other problem or big
It's data, right? It's all about the data. Yeah.
And just to add a few more comments on that, imbalances of categories is another big problem. We usually have more negative cases than positive. That's the case for the diseases, for example, and that's a huge problem for AI. And so we usually use techniques and statistical approaches to solve that problem, but it's a huge problem, right? So maybe we need twins and AI techniques to solve that problem as well. So, so yeah, that's the main obstacle: high quality data, contest to help us create great models.
Very good, Sandrine.
Yes, I agree. For us also, getting good historical data is very difficult because the system were not thought to capture the data in the past. So we are lacking historical data. So we mainly focus on data that are being generated on new process. But one of the challenge we have also in the pharma industry is the capabilities. So we didn't have all the resource in the expertise in data science, in communication, in cloud systems. So we are building that at the moment. That's certainly one of the challenge. And another challenge that we will face is to introduce the automation and digitalization in the plants. So to train operators with that and to have that change be accepted.
Terrific. Yeah, and I will say one of the things we certainly see is it is that organizational inertia and you know, upskilling is certainly one that we run into quite a lot. And then finally, Steve, back to you.
Yeah, thanks. Well, again, I think my colleagues have covered probably, at least from this perspective, you know, what's at the core, of course, quality data. You know, stepping back from that, what we ultimately need is trust, right? And that often is the arbiters of the trust, which is why we're talking about the regulatory bodies, because they're the ones that hold the line on whether or not we've done our jobs well. And I think what we've seen from other industries during this kind of digital transformation is, and I think Charles really touched on it, the field needs to understand the importance of collecting data for the purpose of actually building high quality models so that we can get out of this empirical approach that is very costly and of course, you know, the high cost of time of trials. So to be able to work in our metadata division, we do quite a bit of, we run clinical trials, we run many of the COVID vaccine trials, et cetera. And we're focused on collecting data specifically with the mind of repurposing it for creating artificial control arms, as Charles talked about, replacing placebo patients with virtual patients so everybody can get the treatment. But so we're conducting the trials, we're designing the trials with the future in mind, not just immediate endpoint. And when you make that change to not just the short-term goal, but the long-term goal, you collect data better, it's more rich, our AI models will get better. And when we think about the model first, that's when change really happens.
Terrific. And with that, that's, I think, Steve, Sandrine, Alberto, Charles, thank you so much for just a fascinating discussion today. You know, so much promise, so much opportunity, and you know, amazing work that's already being done. Really, really inspires what we'll see happening in the coming years. So I'd like to thank you for spending some time with us today, and MedCity News for hosting this, and look forward to future discussions and seeing what great work comes out of all of your projects.
Wow, this was such an engaging discussion on a really emerging topic within healthcare. I wanted to thank all the panelists for their expert commentary. I thought it was amazing to get a little history lesson of how one of the starts to digital twin technology was actually back with the Apollo 13 expedition. So thank you again to all the panelists, and see you soon.